Hello, you wonderful people. In this video, we're going to take a look how to build a custom widget for our Strapi admin. So let's jump right into it and check it out. By the way, if you want to hang out or ask us questions, did you know that we have open office hours Monday through Friday at Strapi's Discord server at 12:30 p.m. CST time? Well, if you're around, stop on by, say hello. But let's get started. So let's take a look on what we're going to build today. Here I'm on my Strapi homepage. If we scroll down, we now have this newly featured dashboard that you might have noticed. But you can now create widgets that you could embed in your dashboard, allowing you to add any functionality that you want. And here we're creating a simple widget that displays number of content types we have for each content. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to build this project from scratch. And this tutorial is loosely based on our documentation, but I wanted to create a step-by-step instructional, starting with the basics and showing you how to build this out from scratch. You could also find the repo for the completed project, including the README file that you can use as an example. And yes, you're going to see some missing images because I'm recording this video and finalizing this README file, so it's ready. But once the video's up, you'll be able to see this README file if you want to see any of the steps that I took as reference making this video. But I'll cover everything here. So without any ado, let's get started. We are going to start by creating our first Strapi project first. I'm going to use the npx create Strapi app at latest, and I'm going to call my Strapi application my Strapi app. This is going to go ahead and run us through some basic questions. For now, we're going to skip signing up for Strapi Cloud. By the way, did you know Strapi Cloud is now free? Let's click skip. For database, we're going to say yes for use SQLite. Start with an example structure of data. I'm going to say yes, even though we're not going to use it. Of course, we want to use TypeScript. Install dependencies with npm. Let's do that. Initialize the Git repository. I like that. And this is going to go ahead and set up our basic project. Now let's change directories into our Strapi project and open it in VS Code. And now that we have VS Code open, we could start our project to make sure that everything works. Just to make it easier so you could see everything, I'm not going to use the integrated terminal. I'm just going to do it here. I'm in the root of my project, and I'm going to run npm run dev to start my application. This is going to open up our project, typically in port 1337, but I'm running it on 1338. That's because that's the change I made here in the env file, just to make my life a little bit easier, since I tend to work with a lot of Strapi projects. Navigating to your project, you're going to be greeted with this admin sign up form. Go ahead and create your first admin user. I'm going to go ahead and quickly fill this out. Make sure that you use a very secure password. Obviously, monkey1234 is the way to go. And hopefully I spelled it wrong or correct. Nice. Once you're logged in, you're going to be greeted by a dashboard. And currently, if we take a look at our dashboard here, we just see our main getting started guide, and we have these two widgets. And today we're going to work on creating a third widget. Under the hood, Strapi widgets are basically Strapi plugins. What's awesome, you could have a plugin that could also be a custom field and also be a widget that you're able to inject in our admin homepage. So to get started, we're going to use the Strapi SDK for plugins, and we're going to copy this npx command to allow us to create our plugin. Back in my terminal, I'm going to stop my project, clear the screen, and I'm going to run this command. This is going to go ahead and initialize our plugin and walk us through some basic questions. I'm going to name this my first widget, just like this. Plugin display name, my first widget. This would be the human red name. Now description, my first widget, very basic. Plugin author name, Paul Bratz. Plugin author email, paul.bratzlavsky@strapi.io. And then git URL, because I didn't push this to Git yet, I'm going to keep this blank. Plugin license, MIT. And the most important part here, yes, you do want to register this both with the admin panel and both with the server, because you're going to use both those features of our plugin. Use editor config, sure. Use lint, yes. Use lint, I should say, ESLint. Use prettier, yes. Use TypeScript, of course. And this is going to go ahead and create our plugin. Once all the dependencies are installed and your plugin has created, before we could initialize it, we need to add it to our Strapi's config plugin.ts file. So go ahead, copy this code snippet here. And in VS Code, we're going to navigate to config, plugins, and we're going to register our plugin with Strapi. Now that this is done, before restarting our project, you could navigate to source, plugins, and you could see that we have our newly created plugin here, which includes our admin, which is our front-end code of our plugin, and our server. We'll revisit this in just a moment, but first, let's go ahead and restart our application. And to restart Strapi, I'm going to run npm run dev. Taking a look at our admin panel, we might not notice anything changed, but here we could see that in the menu here, if I click on the page, notice we have this tiny message that says, welcome to the first widget plugin. And this means that our plugin is working. So the way we're registering this in the menu is inside our code, in our plugins folder, navigate to the admin in the source and take a look at the index file. You could see that we have our register function that allows us to register our plugin. And here we see that we're registering it in our Strapi navigation. We don't need this for this project because it's going to be a widget. So let's go ahead and delete this. Once everything is deleted, and if I go back and refresh, notice our changes didn't take effect because we need to rebuild our plugin. So what I'm going to do in my terminal, in a second window, in the root of my project, I'm going to cd into source, plugins, and then I'm going to cd into my plugin. And you could build your plugin by running npm run build. This is going to go ahead and rebuild your plugin. So now when I refresh, notice that our plugin disappeared from our side navigation here because we removed it. To make the development process easier, I'm going to clear the screen. We could keep our plugin in watch mode so it will automatically be rebuilt while we're building and developing the plugin. And the way we could do that is run npm run watch. So now when I make the changes, the plugin will be automatically rebuilt. So now that we know that we have our index.ts file in our admin where we could register our plugin either in our navigation, this is exactly where we would register our plugin to display in our widget. But before doing that, let's first create our component that's going to be the view for our widget. Here in the plugin admin, and let me zoom in a little bit. If we scroll down, we have our components. We're going to create our component here. And this is just React. So we're just going to create a simple React component. So inside this folder, I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to call it metricswidget.tsx. And here we're just going to create a simple React functional component that's just going to say hello from my first widget. Now that we have this, our widget's still not going to display because we have to register it. So going back into our index.ts file, here we have a method called app.widget, and it has a method called register. And this takes in an object where we define our widget. We're going to define an icon and our title, and we could import our icon from our design systems. And after we have our icon and title, we need to go ahead and point to a component that's going to be an entry point to our widget. And this is going to be our metric widget component that we just created. And finally, our widget needs to have an ID and our plugin ID, which is the ID of our plugin that we're able to get from our project that is found here in the plugin ID.ts file. Now that we have this, and because we're watching our plugin in watch mode, and I did have a typo here, it's app.widgets.register. And now if we double check our front end and we scroll down, boom, we have our first widget component that we created. It's not doing anything yet. And this is something we're going to take a look at next, how to create a custom controller and a route in order to do something useful. But before we do that, this is amazing. We have created a UI component that we're able to display in our Strapi admin. This is powerful because now we could do any awesome custom dashboard with anything that our client may want. We could have an SEO metric component. We could have a dashboard, anything that our client asks for. So let's continue. So taking a look at our plugin structure, we have two important folders. Admin, which is for all of our front-end code, basically our client-side React code. And then we have our server folder, which is going to be all of our backend logic. So if we open it up, back inside source, here we're going to take a look at the two most important places that we're going to take a look and do most of our work from. It's going to be inside our controllers folder, where we are going to be able to write a custom controller with custom logic to do something. And then once we have the controller, we have to make sure that we register it within our routes to be able to serve that endpoint to our end user via our API. So let's go ahead and do that now. We're going to start inside our controller folder, inside the controller.ts file. We're actually going to go ahead and remove this indexed controller, and we're going to create our own controller that's going to do something. And first, we're going to start with something really basic. We are just going to create a placeholder controller that eventually will add more custom logic called getContentCounts. And right now, we're just going to return a message saying hello from the server. Now that we have this controller, for it to work, we actually need to reference it in our routes. So here we're going to navigate to our routes folder, and we're going to see that we have content API routes. These routes is something that is going to be available to our external API, so external front end. So let's first take a look how we could update this route in order to get our data. And this is going to be pretty straightforward. We no longer have our index named controller, but we created a new one called getContentsCount. So now when someone navigates to our plugin's root endpoint, the handler is going to trigger our custom controller that we created here that should show us our hello from server message. And after those code changes, let's restart our Strapi server by running npm run dev and navigating to settings. And here under roles, we'll go to public. You now should see that we have our my first widget component that's pointing to our getContentCounts endpoint. So let's go ahead and check this. We should be able to make a GET request in Postman and see the data. Go ahead and save before testing our endpoint. And here in Postman, I'm going to make a request to localhost 1338 to our API, my first widget, to the root route. And when I click send, notice that we do get our message. And taking a look at this route, this is our content API route. And this is best when it's going to be a route that's going to be consumed by other applications than Strapi. For instance, our external website or a way to open up an endpoint to others to use. But in our case, for our widget, we want to have an internal API that's only available to our Strapi application. So now let's go see how we could create a admin route. And this way you'll have two different ways of setting up routes in Strapi. One for content API and one for admin API, which will be internal to our Strapi admin panel. So now let's navigate to our routes folder and inside there create a new file called admin API.ts. And we're going to paste the same route that we created earlier, but this is only going to be accessible to the admin. And we're going to, instead of doing it on the root of our API endpoint, we're going to have a path called count that's going to go ahead and trigger this handler to get the data. Now that we have this admin API.ts file, we have to update our index to export that newly created route. So the first thing I'm going to do is import that newly created route here at the top from admin API. I'm going to call it admin API routes. And now before the content API route declaration, we're going to go ahead and add our admin routes. So this way we have two different routes, one available internally to our Strapi application and another route if we want to make it open to external calls, like from your front end or other applications, where the admin route is specifically to be consumed by your Strapi admin panel. I'm going to keep both these routes for this example, but you might have widgets that you only want to have admin routes available. Now that we have this, let's actually take a look how we could query our internal route from our Strapi component. So let's navigate back to our admin folder, source, in components, and we're going to continue our work at the metrics widget component to see how we could fetch data internally in our Strapi application. First thing we're going to do here at the top, we're going to import our useState and useEffect from React. And then we're also going to import useFetchClient. UseFetchClient allows you to easily fetch your Strapi data from your Strapi server. We're also going to import our plugin ID, and we're going to use the plugin ID and the path to our endpoint to construct a URL that we're going to pass to our useFetchClient. Let's go ahead and use FetchClient, and we have a helpful method get that we'll be able to use to make a get request. And we're going to set up some basic state for our React component. We're going to do one for our loading, for our metrics to save our data, and then we're going to have an error state. Next, we're going to have our useEffect, and here we're going to create a function that we're going to call here when our useEffect runs, which basically is going to use our get method that we're getting from our useFetchClient. We're passing our path to our endpoint that we created earlier with our route to fetch our data from our custom controller. Once we get the data, we're just going to save it as formatted data. Eventually, we add some additional functionality to parse the data when we implement the actual logic. But for now, we're just going to set the current response, which is going to be our message that we created earlier. And now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and render it here in our UI. But before we do that, we're going to add some states to our widget. We have widget loading state, widget error, or if there's no data, widget no data. Notice that we have to import our widget. And that's going to be imported from our Strapi admin package here. So now that that's all set, finally, let's go ahead and update return GSX here just to take the response and stringify it so we could see it. Now that we have our front end done, and so what it's doing, we're using useFetchClient to make a get request to our route that we specified in our routes folder. And here we're targeting our admin route that's going to trigger our get content count controller, which is going to return this message, hello from server. So let's go see if it worked. Making sure that my Strapi application running, which is great. And now back in my dashboard, if I scroll down, notice that we have our message, hello from the server. And this is coming from our custom controller. So we know that our front end fetch logic works. So finally, we were going to finish up by adding custom logic to our Strapi controller to populate the content metrics to make sure that we're able to get all the different content types available with the count for each. So let's jump back in our VS Code to our controller.ts file and let's implement that custom logic here. By the way, in the description to this video, you'll be able to find a link to the project with the README where you could see all the code snippets that I used and a detailed overview that I used to prep for this video. So if I'm moving too fast, definitely check out the supplementary resource. Here, what we're going to do is we're going to add the logic to be able to get our content types. On the Strapi object, we have access to our content types. What we're going to go ahead is filter for all of the content types that are related to our API. It's going to go ahead get the name and set the initial count to 0. Next, we're going to have a for loop, which is going to go through our entries, find them based on the name, get the UI ID, and then get the count for each content type. And that's going to be set in our content types. And finally, we're going to go ahead and return our content types to our front end. And now on the front end, let's implement the change to allow us to parse our data from our response so we could display it on our front end. First, let's update our format data variable with the proper types. Next, we're going to check if we have data and type of object. We're going to await all of our entries and map over all of our data. And then finally, we're going to set it to our state. So now in our front end, if we navigate to our dashboard and scroll down, notice that we are getting our data that we're able to see. So the final step, let's go ahead and make it prettier by using Strapi Design System. So in our front end, at the top here, we're going to go ahead and import the required components for our table from Strapi Design System. And now in the return statement, we're going to update it with the following. Instead of the diffs here and just stringifying the object, we are going to have a table. We're going to iterate through our entries, and we're going to display them in this nice table. Now, once all of this is done, back in our Strapi application, you should see that we have a nice table displaying our data. So to sum up, what did we learn today? Well, number one, we learned about Strapi widgets and how to register them in the admin panel. A Strapi widget is basically a Strapi plugin that we're able to register in the Strapi dashboard. And we're able to do it inside the admin folder in the source, in the index.ts file using app.widgets.register method. The most important part is to have an entry component, which is a React component that's going to serve as your entry for your widget. And that's exactly what we created inside our components folder with the component called metrics widget that we see here. For our widget to consume data, we were importing useFetchClient, which has available methods, not only get, but we also have post, delete, and update. But the get method allows us to fetch our data from our external API that we created inside our plugin. And that's found inside our server folder. And the two most important files that we needed to work on, number one is the controller, where we were able to create a custom controller. And the second is in our routes, where we were able to create different routes. We took a look at how to create an admin route. We also took a look how to create content API routes. The difference between the two, content API routes are available to external applications outside of Strapi, like your front end built with Next.js or your React Native app, where the admin route is specifically for the Strapi admin, and that's what we used here. And we were able to define those routes in the routes file, which takes an array of the routes, the path, the type, and the handler that we call. And in future videos, we'll explore more complex examples. But in this video, we took a look at how to be able to create your first Strapi widget via a plugin. This should be a great starting point for you to create any additional cool dashboard widgets for your Strapi application based on your client's needs. Nice. So we took a look and saw how to create our first widget. I would love to see what kind of ways or cool ideas you are going to come up with to customize your Strapi admin panel. Well, let us know in the comments what you're building or any other future videos that you want to see from us. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you in the next one.